Hello, furries and firewall freakers. My name is TV Skyn, and over on the Game Grumps YouTube channel, there is a music video that's just been released from a group called Night Runner, who, as far as I can tell, are not like the Game Grumps themselves, but who are friends of them, associated with them. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not up on my Game Grumps lore. It does feature Dan Avidan, who's one of the Game Grumps and also the frontman for Ninja Sex Party, which is a group I quite like. And people sort of started messaging me about this thing. Hey, there's a new animated music video. Do you want to take a look at it? And I was like, well, I mean, I don't follow the Game Grumps. I don't know. Is this really? I don't know. I was kind of hesitant until I figured out what this music video is actually about. And it turns out this music video is about cyberpunk furries. And I was like, okay. Well, all right, that's interesting. That's not something I've seen before, so let's actually have a look at it. And I was made more interested when I found out that is produced by the Knights of the Light Table, which is a small animation group who also produced the Starlight Brigade music video for Ninja Sex Party and Twerp on that particular song, and they're a really impressive animation studio, like based on the work from them I've seen so far, punching kind of above their weight, because as far as I can tell, they're a really small animation studio, but they've been putting out some really high quality work in their collaborations with Game Grumps adjacent persons. So I'm gonna try and be dodging copyright bots a little bit here, because they tend to react when you just look at footage from a thing, and even if you're not using the official audio, they get a little cranky. So if you want to watch the actual music video, that's not here. This is not like a reaction thing. We're gonna be taking an analytical breakdown lens to the thing. So I would recommend that before you watch this video, go and watch the actual music video itself. There's a link down in the description, and then come back here and we'll talk about what's going on in it and how it uses its stuff and like all the cool things that are going on, because there is a lot of cool stuff going on. So normally, when I do these animation breakdowns, I'll be on the YouTube page for the actual video, and I'll be using YouTube's tools to cycle through the frames. Unfortunately, that has a tendency to slow down and be really like buffering and all kinds of internet problems and stuff like that. So I'm taking a chance and putting the thing into Premiere Pro instead, in the hopes that Premiere Pro will not crash on me, which, you know, is a crapshoot. But also because it makes it a little bit easier to smoothly scroll through things and see what's going on in this thing. So, this is a cyberpunky, especially a neo-noir style music video. And there's a little bit of a distinction there. Neo-noir tends to be, like, that's your Blade Runners. That's, like, when you have these dark cityscapes that are lit up by fake, like by, well, not fake, but by artificial lighting. Neon lighting especially, but generally speaking, places that are devoid of natural light most of the time. And there's an aesthetic that you'll see in Blade Runner, but which is also like in lots of movies that are not cyberpunky at all, but it's something that's kind of merged into our understanding of cyberpunk aesthetic, especially because of Blade Runner, also because of stuff like Ghost in the Shell, and other notable cyberpunk works like that, but which wasn't really like the neo-noir aesthetic is not tied explicitly to cyberpunk, or at least it wasn't, but it has very much become so in recent times, especially with its integration into Cyberpunk 2077, which has really started to cement that as the aesthetic of cyberpunk. But I do want to draw the distinction, because not all cyberpunk is neo-noir, and not all neo-noir is cyberpunk. Anyway, this is explicitly cyberpunk, specifically because the imagery and the stuff that's going on, let's see if we can find a good shot for it, is specifically about augmentation of human bodies, a sci-fi universe where it's clearly also like the forces of wealth oppressing the lower classes, like, which is very much the stuff of cyberpunk aesthetic, where you have these characters who are cybernetically enhanced and like elements of transhumanism, or though in this case it would be trans anthropomorphic animalism, transferianism, I don't know, elements of that. Which makes for a really interesting visual universe. Like, it's kind of rare that we see, like, major works, especially inside gaming culture, that are so explicitly, like, drawing on the aesthetics of the furry subculture, because the furry subculture to a lot of people tends to be a punchline. It's like, furries. Like, it's something people make fun of without really knowing anything about what the subculture is or what it's about. Outside, it's just about the porn, isn't it? Which it's really not. So that's nice. Like, that's okay. That's cool. That's drawing on a very different aesthetic, because the previous video that Knights of the Light Table did with Dan Avidan and Ninja Sex Party and Twerp was specifically one that heavily referenced like 80s, 90s style OVA anime sci-fi aesthetics. And this one, rather than drawing on like nostalgic anime aesthetics fully, merges this nostalgic anime aesthetic with something which is like a little bit more niche, which is interesting. So let's take a look at it. And the first thing is a visual language thing that you need to be paying attention to, which is common to pretty much, like, Cyberpunk and neo-noir use this all the time. And that is the embodiment of light as power, or vitality, or strength, or presence. And that's something, it's not exclusive to neo-noir and cyberpunk, obviously. Like, think of a lightsaber, think of literally any sci-fi thing where light tends to denote power. But especially in neo-noir stuff like this, light and power are intimately connected. And one of the obvious ways that this comes across is here. Take this scene of absolute carnage and murder, where we have this character right here who is dead, extremely dead, but then we have this character right here who's not quite so dead. And how do we know that this character is not quite so dead? Well, there's still light in their eyes. And all of the characters here have pretty much got light-up eyes. And I'm just going to scroll through quickly here, and you can see just while quickly scrolling through the thing, that light is something that's very much being played with all the time in this thing. Like, it's all the time it's playing with light. And with uses of framing and light. Like, take a look at this scene, for example, with the pink neon light coming in through the windows, juxtaposed against the dark of the surrounding areas. And that's something that runs through this entire thing. And it begins right at the start, when we have this circle motif that's established. Okay, so this circle, which is in the logo, transitions us into looking at whatever the hell this is. But there seems to be some holes there, and that looks kind of like paint or something? Is that paint? Is that paint? Is that just someone who's, like, had a paintball match? Oh, no, that's not a paintball match at all. They're dead. They have been shot dead and murdered, very obviously, and they are identified with this circle motif on their character. Keep that in mind as we move forward. And here, we see the cyberpunk neo-noir aesthetic come into play very explicitly, but we also see, look at this artifacting, and it's kind of, I wish I could get a higher resolution, higher quality version than the one I managed to grab off of YouTube. But what it's also emulating here in its look, and this is something that they also did on Starlight Brigade, is the corruption and the decay that you get on magnetic videotape, VHS. And you can kind of see that, especially in the way that you can see how the light, and again, I wish I had a higher quality, but you can see how the light blooms out from light sources. Like, you can see it here, how, like, there's a little red halo all around the color here. That's an artifact that tends to happen, especially on VHS, where light and certain parts of like the color compression tends to bleed out and, like, sort of extend it over its edges, which gives a very particular look that in more modern times has become very, very heavily associated with, like, 80s aesthetics and VHS aesthetics and even 90s aesthetics, where, like, that particular compression, that particular artifacting has become a very popular aesthetic choice, and it's very much in presence here, where you can see pretty much with every light source that we deal with that there's always this little bit of haloing, little bit of like light bleed around anything that glows, which enhances the sense that what you're looking at here is some, like, lost and found tape from the 1990s, some music video that was produced 30 years ago, and someone has just transcoded it onto YouTube right now. Anyway, dead person on the floor. And here we see one of the clever things that you can do with light in animation, which is to define shape. Which is something that you'll see especially old 80s and 90s anime. Like, a character will be in a car driving, and the character themselves will be, like, 100% static. Like, they will not move a muscle or an inch at all. They just sit there and be a completely flat, static image. But in order to create motion and movement in the scene, the animators will move these flat surfaces of light across the character, which gives the impression that the character is moving through a space with various light sources that are throwing light onto them. And that's a trick that's very much being used here, because, as you can tell by looking at, they're dead, so obviously they're not moving. But in order to get some dynamism and movement and motion into the scene, we have these searchlights, or, I don't know, cars outside, who knows what this light is, that washes over this very dead character. And interestingly, look at the way the light interacts with the blood, for example. It really doesn't. Like, the blood stays pretty much the exact same color no matter what lighting conditions it's under. The same thing goes for the glowing color circle that identifies the character. That stays the same no matter what light falls on it. That's an interesting little visual trick, because the blood is actually kind of important. That's going to be helping us transition into the next few shots of the thing. But the light here is being used to do two things. First of all, it adds a little bit of dynamism. Like, imagine if the whole scene was just this static light and the camera slowly pulling back. It wouldn't really be as interesting, and you wouldn't really sell the idea of this cyberpunk neo-noir scene that we're actually in, which is what artificial light helps to do, is like when we get these light sources that are kind of sweeping across the character and has this unnatural bluish glow, the world building is already being said that, oh, okay, we're in a world where artificial light dominates. This isn't sunlight. This isn't moonlight. This is some kind of artificial light sweeping in from a window from the outside. And there's also animation timings to think about here already. Because you can see that here, for example. See how that light there moves, but the rest of the light in the scene doesn't. And then on the next frame, this light stays still, and the rest of the light in the scene, and then you can see how sometimes they alternate the timing on the light that sweeps through the scene a little bit back and forth. And that helps also create the impression, like, it helps deepen the space a little bit, so that it doesn't feel so mechanical. It doesn't feel like the light hits everything all at the same time. No, we've got these light sources sweeping over various parts of the room on different timings, which gives more of a sense of depth to the space. And that's also what the light is being used to do here. It's very much being used to define the shape of the character. Because you can see here, without the light, it's like, oh, okay, we can see there's some folds in the clothes and stuff like that, so we get a sense of the character's shape and proportionality. But once the light sweeps over, oh, now we can really, now the character really looks three-dimensional because of the way that this stark lighting is being used to really highlight the shapes of the body, which is, again, a thing taken right out of, like, 80s and 90s anime, where that was used very extensively to do that exact thing, to make the characters feel more like a physical presence. And so take a look at, as we fade into this next shot, take a look at the commonalities between the two shots, because the commonalities are stuff that creates visual continuum between two shots, and therefore creates a visual connection between them. It helps us to identify, okay, in terms of visual language, it helps us connect one shot to another as a narrative. So we have the purple blood, we have the light sweeping over the character, we have the general color aesthetic of the scene, like the blues and the pales. And as we sweep into this next character, well, there's the purple blood. So this case is clearly connected to that character, and they almost kind of seemed like they were holding something before they died, didn't they? And we have the sweeping light as well, which connects the two scenes together. So, oh, okay, so this character here was killed for that case right there. And that's really, really, really extremely efficient storytelling, which is something that you kind of have to do in a music video, because you only have those like 3 or 4 minutes for however long the song is going to establish your entire narrative and resolve it. So you better move fast, and one of the ways that you can move fast is to use this like strong cinematic connecting language to show, okay, this character was killed for the briefcase and whatever is inside it, and they were killed by this guy, and you can see the sweeping of the light creating a visual connection between the two scenes. And as he opens the case, we get our first introduction of a new color. Now, it's already introduced here. You can see the yellow glow on the character's hands, which then comes to the fore as he opens the case, and you see the light, like the same sweeping light that's sweeping over the character, sweeps over the gold and creates this glare, which then, poof, dominates the entire scene. And again, from a visual language perspective, oh, okay, so, like, the gold is everything. The gold dominates. The gold is power. Again, light as power is a thing that's all over this thing. And the gold does that because, like, one little light sweep across it and boom, it owns the entire scene. And again, visual language doing connections, it connects us to this character right here, who's the villain of our piece, the antagonist. Who is golden himself, but who's also, well, he's literally smoking gold. Like, he's literally kind of inhaling it. Which again gives this, like, strong physical connection between him and the thing over which the character we saw in the opening shot was killed. And another creative, there's a lot of creative transitions in this thing, by the way. Like we get the fading transition from the dead guy with the blood into the guy in the car who is villain of our piece as far as I could tell. And then we get that sweeping into the golden transition, taking over the scene, becoming the golden smoke from this guy's cyber cigar. And then we get this hand brushing across the screen, like literally swiping away the image, which is a very like future techy cyberpunky thing to do, but which is also a hand gently caressing the chest of our bad guy as this trophy lady robot doe pleases her man, I suppose. And here, look again at the animation timings, because that's going to be in every single shot. And by the way, I love the character design of this bad guy. We'll talk about him more once we actually get a proper look at him. But take a look at the animation timings. Let's see if I can find a good shot for it here. So, the doe's head moves a little bit, like as she's about to transition into a different expression, but then his arm moves, then she moves, then he moves, then she moves, then he moves, then she moves. And like that, again, that timing offset is constantly there to give the characters more of a sense that they're not all moving in sync, like they're not all moving on the same mechanical timing, which helps, especially when you're working with limited animation, which is what this is, which helps give more of a sense of dynamism to the scene. And we get another golden transition, but this time we move back to our protagonist, this guy with a triangle on his head. And by the way, the shape language of this guy is really strong. Like, you can see the, like, that sharp curve, and then the straight, and then the curve, and then the, like, curve into straight into curve, which is all over his character design. And curve into straight is, like, a really basic illustration and animation principle. Like, it's a really simple way to create characters that are dynamic and interesting to look at. And it's very much on display here. You see, like, relative straight into curve, curve, straight, curve, straight, curve, straight, which is pretty much everywhere here, which is just nice and efficient. So here again, the storytelling is doing a very efficient job. We're holding still on a very static image for quite a long time because the point of this scene is for us to take in what these people have walked in on, which is a scene of just absolute awful murderous carnage. And the focus of the scene obviously is on the character here in the front who is really suffering. And also on setting up these two characters, which will become, like, relevant as the thing goes on. But here's something, like, some lovely bit of animation, and this is where the furry aesthetic comes to the fore, and it is used to great effect, because something clever that you can do, especially with animal mouths, or, like, especially with canid, this dog-like, wolf-like snouts, is, like, the interplay between the lips and the teeth as an expression of depth of emotion. And that's something that, like, we know it from dogs and wolves, like, when they're aggressive, they'll curl their lips over their teeth and, like, but here, it's used to express an anthropomorphic expression. Specifically, it's an expression of absolute pain, and you can really see, and by the way, here you can really see that it's limited animation, like, there's very little transition from here to there, which is fine, by the way, that's not a criticism, limited animation works like this. But here you can really see how they're using, like, look at the lip curl, especially over those two teeth right there. Like there, like that little raise right there. You can see how the lip is kind of relaxed over those teeth right now. And then there, it curls back up a little bit further, and you really get the sense, like, that this guy is, or girl, or non-binary person, who knows, is holding, like, a lot of emotions inside them that's just kind of scrunching up their face, which is really efficient. And it's a good use of the furry aesthetic, like, to enhance the expression of the character by using the particular anatomical features of the character that you're working with. And I like the composition of this scene as well, because we have this light square of the door behind our two main characters in the scene, which frames them, like, which makes them the center of what's going on, but which also gives the scene almost a kind of Renaissance painting religious significance. Like, this is the kind of thing that you might see, like, this is a freaking Caravaggio painting of a dead saint and someone cradling their body as a dead martialized cradle on the ground. That's very much what the composition is doing as well, is this really strong centering, which I think is really nice. Like, it's really well done. So you have this painterly composition almost, which we can juxtapose later, by the way. And here's something clever as well. You see that? This is the same drawing, more or less, as that. Like, you can see how he goes from this pose of, like, dejected mourning into a howl of pain, and then back into this, like, this sigh of misery as he connects back to the dead character, who might be their lover or their friend, or who knows what the connection is, but it's clearly an intense emotional relationship that's been broken, a bond that's been severed. And then we get this sliding in little extra panel out on the side, introducing us to our two secondary characters. This guy, or, again, gender non-specific, it's actually kind of hard to tell sometimes, whom is not quite dead, because there's light in their eyes. Again, visual representations of light as power. And then this lovely shot, like where the characters had been solid before, all of a sudden they almost look like ghosts in the scene, where again, look at the blood on the hand. That's such a clever way to do it. Because again, there's a clever application of the furry anatomy here. Because it's a furry character, we can justify giving him these ridiculously large hands, which allows us to do this big handprint thing really prominently in this shot, which I just think works really well. And again, notice how light is being used to shape the body of the character. As he's crouched down here, or they're crouched down here, I should say, it's like, yeah, there's light and shading on them, but it's not that prominent. But as they rise into the shot, the light, like, they're literally lit up. And again, we get this idea of a light beam right through their head, like a determination, a thought enters their mind. And we can see them having, like, deciding on the resolve to seek revenge. And I really love the... again, we have these cyberpunk aesthetics where we have both the like... Which is what I really like about the juxtaposition between, like, cyberpunk and furry aesthetics, is that furries tend to, like, when you look at animals, the natural human thing is like, oh yeah, they're associated with nature and the natural world and, like, uncorrupted by technology and stuff. But here, explicitly, we have integrations of visual aesthetics of technology and visual aesthetics of animals, which, again, makes for visually interesting things. I also love the shape language on this guy's tail. Like, that's a really clever way to do an interesting little tail. Like, we have this blooming out wedge shape, kind of, which is then narrowed down into a little tuft with the band. Just a lovely little bit of character design. Love his shoes, too. And again, light as power. Both in the eyes of our main character, like the light behind him, and then the light underneath these two characters as this guy rises back to life, basically. And again, here we see, like, by the way, there's, like, Disney trivia time. On 101 Dalmatians, Cruella de Vil has this big, fancy car that she drives around everywhere, which is involved in a number of action shots in the film. The animators absolutely did not want to animate her goddamn car, because cars are, first of all, difficult to draw, and even more difficult to animate. Like, seriously, they're technical objects. It's really hard to make them look good. So what the Disney animators did was they actually made a physical model of the car and photographed it and rotoscoped it. In order to avoid having to draw the car like freehand from shot to shot, they basically rotoscoped a model of the car into the film in order just to save themselves the goddamn trouble, because even Disney's animators did not want to fuck with trying to hand animate a car. Knights of the Light Table, though. Oh, I say, fucking come at me, bro. I can animate a goddamn car. And they did. This is all hand animated. You can see the imperfections in the lines. And, like, you can see how difficult it is to maintain the three-dimensional, especially look at the line behind the window here. It's very inconsistent from frame to frame, which kind of showcases the difficulty of doing a shot like this, where a technical object as complicated as a car moves in 3D space. This is why I'm telling you, like, Disney animators didn't want to take this stuff on. So it's really impressive that Knights of the Light Table were like, yeah, we can do that. Sure, why not? We'll hand animate a goddamn car. That's just really impressive to me, because that's like one of those little things that in animation is just a really difficult object to work with, because it's so complicated. There's so many three-dimensional shapes that need to move through space, but they do such a good job. And again, this light transition, like where the light on the floor kind of transitions into the light sweeping across the windshield of this car. And again, light as power is very much there. And again, notice the subtle color language. We've got these yellows, which only, so far in this entire short, those yellows have only been identified with the villain. So we see this car and we're like, oh yeah, that's the villain's car. And you might not even consciously realize it, but because of the color coding, because of like that yellow lens flare, doing the storytelling for us, like we instantly know what we're dealing with here, which again is really efficient visual storytelling. It saves you the trouble of having to try and do an establishing shot of, oh, there's the car and there's the guy inside. You can just kind of, oh yeah, visual identification complete. We've got the yellows, we've got like the antlers on the front there. That does the job. Also, something I want to point your attention to is how sloppy the backgrounds are, and that is not a criticism. When it comes to animation production, especially small-scale animation production on a budget, you want to find places where you can cut corners. Like I mentioned, Disney animators were like, we're not animating a goddamn car, let's build a model, let's rotoscope it into the film, save ourselves the trouble. And here, this background here is very efficiently rendered. Like, that's probably the better word to use than sloppy. It's very efficiently rendered because you can see it defines all the necessary light and color spaces that you need to indicate that there's a cityscape here without really rendering all of the buildings in exacting details. It's much more sort of an impressionist background scene almost. Which does the job of establishing a large cityscape because we have this parallax scrolling effect. Like, you have the static background back here. These buildings practically do not move. And then you have these buildings which are a little bit closer, and they slowly scroll from right to left as the car moves forward, which gives you this sense of a deepening space on a long highway. And that allows the animators to get away with, look at the lines on the road here. This right here never animates. Doesn't change. They don't do anything with that whatsoever. It's just got this painting brush texture that kind of informs a little bit of the shape of it, but it never changes, and it doesn't have to, because the rest of the scene is doing the work of communicating, okay, this thing is moving at high speed, again, using light to indicate motion in the scene, in a shot that, like, really, when you just look at it, is incredibly static. Like, nothing's really happening. Like, there's no, like, scrolling animation cycle on the road or on the street. There's just this little flicker in the headlights of the cars and the light creating the movement in the scene with these lampposts slowly fading into the background, carrying the light with them. Which, again, really just highly efficient work, frankly. And then another lovely transition, because we have like the light sweeping over the car, and then, woof, the light sweeping over the car helps transition from this shot into this, with the cyber scissors of our revived secondary protagonist and his cool robot arm, where, again, you can really see that they're employing the visual idea of light as power, with the glowing blade and the lightning and, like, the golden power source feeding into the thing. Because gold is also power, which we already established, like gold is connected with power as well. Which tells us, okay, this guy's alive, he's going to be a factor as we transition into... And notice how completely the colors shift. Like, when we're dealing with our main characters, we are dealing with blues, greens, teals, grays. But as we enter the world of the upper class of our villain, of our bad guy, oh, we've got gold, we've got pinks, we've got yellows, we've just got, like, warmth and warm hues. And this sort of like, pleasant feeling, almost sexual environment. And again, the transitions are so clever here. Like, we have the lens flare on the blade, transitions us into this shot, with the robot waiter offering a bottle of what the hell ever to a dainty hand, which then transitions us into another hand grabbing the blade of a sword. And again, literal lightsaber, light as power, incredibly clear. And a lot of, like, very cleverly, because we have this dark scene that's only lit up by the blade, you can get away with doing stuff like this, which is just a bunch of, like, bright shapes sort of moving across a dark field to show, okay, this character was swinging the sword around, but we don't have to animate a fully fledged character swinging a sword around for this shot. We can just show the blade moving around, and the human brain will do the rest of the work of sort of, oh, she swung the sword around, and then we see the character, which is a lovely little efficiency again. As we're establishing the stakes here, basically, because we're doing this thing where we go from bad guy, good guy, 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 bad guy. And then we get the confrontation. So there's this cutting back and forth between the two sets of characters, establishing, okay, so that you are not in any doubt. And again, we're only like 56 seconds into this whole thing. So the storytelling, again, has to work on this incredible efficiency, telling us these people are, like, getting their gear and weapons ready to go and kill these people. And here we get, finally, our first shot of our villain. And, like, that is just a cool motherfucking character design. I mean, that is such a clever way to do it. He's literally a hologram face. He's like a cyborg robot dude or whatever. And his face is a hologram, a golden hologram with these completely abstract representations of giant antlers. Which that's just really cool. Like, if you're gonna do furry cyberpunk, holy shit, yes, that's the fucking way to do it. Like, because yes, of course, if you were an anthropomorphic deer, buck, moose, I don't know what he is, then yes, that would be a visual language of power. Is like you replace your natural antlers, which are always associated with like the power and vitality of a deer or whatever the hell he is. And then we replace them with a technological representation of the thing that is not quite like the thing, which is also identified with the aesthetics of stuff like modern and abstract art, which is the kind of thing that we think of as like high art, which is another can of bullshit that we'll open on this channel at some point, which we think of as high art, like rich people artwork, which again is used to place him very definitively, like along with the suit and the tie and the waiters and the butlers and the gold and everything else. We're not left in any doubt whatsoever as to what social class this dude belongs to. And another very clever transition shot as the glasses on the table become the chamber of a revolver. A revolver which will become important, because the music video is named Magnum Bullets. And again, some really just impressive technical animation from Knights of the Light Table, where much like with a car, which is difficult to animate because it's like a highly technical object, there's a lot of things that need to move in 3D space. They're like, yeah, sure, we can animate a gun. And so they do. They animate a handgun. And I could point out little flaws and imperfections and things like that, but it's just, that's a really difficult object to animate moving around in 3D space with consistency. Like, it's just an impressive thing to do. And again, like I love the transitions that are used in this thing because they're both metaphorical, but also just clever visuals, like the spinning chamber of the gun, which then he raises to his face, or they raise to their face, which then becomes, well, a stripper pole basically. As they rise into the shot, clearly again, excellent use of the furry anatomy, like with the mouth and the bared teeth showcasing the anger of this character. And that, like, again, with the curled lip over the teeth. You see that? Like, that little curl of the lips that tells us, oh, that's an angry dog. That's a dog is pissed off at someone or something. As we get, like, a robot stripper. And I'm not really... Is she stripping, or is that just what she looks like? Like, how... Was she wearing clothes before? Is she naked now? Or is she gonna take off the shell and then the sexy bit is gonna be all the wires? Not sure. Doesn't matter. Which, again, this is a repeat of the shot from way the hell back here, where we have, like, the sweeping hand of this woman, this sexy robot who is caressing the chest of the dude, sweeping in across the scene to transition us to the next thing. And that happens again here with the gun, But here it's the whole body that basically sweeps over the scene and creates our transition into the party scene once again. Which transitions us into this bottle of wine, which gives us this red coloration as these characters are stepping through sewers, I guess? Something like that? Some underground something or other that is color-wise and visually connected with the party upstairs, so we can kind of get the feeling that, okay, they've moved from all of their blue and all of their teal and all of their gray closer to what the villain of our piece is into. And again, see the offset timings on the characters' movements. Let's see, we can start from here. So, no movement from him, but movement from the character in the background. Then they move together. Then he moves, she moves, he moves, she moves, he moves, she moves. And you can see how they're trying to avoid having the characters move on the same timing, especially in this shot. In order to avoid making the walk cycles down there look mechanical. And in motion, you can kind of see how it plays out, right? Like that this feels more dynamic than it would if they had all just been moving on the same timing exactly. Another clever little transition with the briefcase. And another bunch of very clever, like, cyberpunk furry aesthetic things being done here. Like, the mask there is really cool, for example. And, like, the replacement of the head spikes on this iguana guy, again, with, like, little floating tech spikes that just kind of hang out over his head. I really like that owl character as well. We'll talk about him a little bit more. He has a better shot later. And so here we have the juxtaposition. Like, just in case you haven't got it yet, just in case it's not clear to you yet, this is what we're dealing with. This guy, money, dead circle person with bullet holes in them, right? That's the stakes. That's what the story is about. This guy, because of money, did the bullet hole shooty death thing. And then those two things transition into eyes. And the triangular wedge shape in the image transitions into the triangular wedge shape on the head of our main character. So this guy is literally inside this person's head. He's in his thoughts. And he's got his eyes on, like, the causes of his anger. Like, the visual storytelling is being very blunt here because it kind of needs to be. And again, lovely little lip curls, lovely use of the anatomy. And this is just, I love the paintings. Like, I love the painting style in the backgrounds here, because it's something with neo-noir especially, is a lot of the times with the aesthetics that are being presented, like, they have a tendency to all go for slick all the time. Like, slick, technological, futuristic, and it tends to try and avoid organic visuals. Like, it tends to try and avoid stuff like this looks like oil on canvas, basically. But this short, I think it uses it very efficiently. Like, because whenever it needs, like, this, we have these characters who are way down in the slums, in the dumps, in the sewers or whatever, but who are raging against the source of this golden light. So when we need this golden light to look kind of epic or heavenly, well, we'll do a painting-like backdrop. But, oh, some lovely effects animation here. Look at this. The smoke starts it off, and then the boom. Like, I love these flash frames. They're so good. Or impact frames, whatever you want to call them. And just some lovely smoke animation, like the way it blooms out. And then we get the rising bullet. Which is, like, the title of the song is Magnum Bullets, and there's a bunch of lyrics in here about the Magnum Bullets thing. And again, look at the play of the light. Because again, with the bullet here, like, from frame to frame, there's not that much that changes about the shape of the bullet. Like, it's not doing anything. It stays pretty consistent in the middle of the screen. But the light and the little play of the highlights and these colors moving across the shape of it gives you the sense that it's spinning, that it's zooming through the air, that it's imbued with power. Which I just think is really lovely. Looks fantastic. as it rises through money and then through dead corpses falling down from above, and then a gun and a knife, and like it rises through all these symbols of like of capitalist oppression, basically. Cyberpunk has a tendency to, like, it always plays with anti-capitalist imagery. And much of the cyberpunk genre, not all of it, but much of it is explicitly anti-capitalist writing. Like, it's writing that specifically deals with the ravages of unchecked free market capitalism on society. And that's very much on display here, like that visual tradition, where he's literally firing a bullet from the slums, from below, from the lower classes, right into the world of the upper classes. Through a grate in the floor, even. I think maybe this is 3D animated. Yeah, I think they've used a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit of 3D animation to make this grate fly through the thing. And I think, yeah, the tables and the general scene here, yeah, most of the architecture of the scene here is 3D animation, but the characters in it are all hand-drawn, as far as I can tell. And so the bullet flies up, and it shatters, again, light as power. It's a challenge to the power of this guy, and it challenges his power by smashing his chandelier, and again, a lovely impact frame. Like, look how cool that is. That's just a bunch of really efficient... Poof. And you can see the light is literally snuffed out for a second as the chandelier loses its glow and starts to fall to pieces. And all of a sudden, darkness intrudes on the scene. All of a sudden, these people who were, like, on top of the pile, and these are, oh yeah, we're the powerful ultra-capitalists who run the world. Yeah, we're having a party. We're being hedonistic and shit. All of a sudden, their world is thrown into darkness a little bit. Their power is threatened, quite literally. Their light is being snuffed out a bit. Ooh, that's actually really good. Look at, like, this is just a little thing, the kinds of little things that I tend to get excited about, but look how this thumb right here, look how the hand rotates around the axis of that thumb a little bit as the character raises their hand and sort of start becoming ready for fight or flight. Oh, that's just a really nice little animation. Like that little hands are complicated things to animate as well. Not as complicated as cars, but still complicated. Oh, that's a really nice little rotation. Nice. This is just a good thing. And again, this owl, I really like his character. I really love, like, the long neck and then the feathery head kind of poofing out from that. Because that's what owls are like, by the way. They're like 90% feathers and 10% everything else. I just really like that. Again, identified with the visual aesthetics of the upper classes. But this guy's more of a punk, which I kind of like. That here we see, like, thugs, punks, hired muscle archetypes. And then here, finally, our bad guy takes notice that something is wrong. His world has been disturbed as the fragments of light fall down around him. Again, notice the difference in timing on how the fragments fall, which again creates more of a sense of 3D space, because these fragments that fall a little bit faster feel like they're more in the foreground, while these feel like they're further in the background because they're moving on different timings. That cigar is clever. Like, that's such a clever... Because, like, he's not even physical enough to really smoke a cigar. So the cigar, it's not like it's an actual cigar, it's just a symbol of power. It's an empty symbol of power. It's just a digital projection of a thing which means power, but which isn't actually anything. Which is cool. Ooh, so good. Look at that. Nothing is there, and then, boom! The heroes have arrived! And, by the way, as the heroes confront the villain, notice the visual symbol that follows them into the scene. And that's something else to take note of. Our victim, way back in the start, is identified with a circle. What's our villain identified with? What's the shape language that tends to identify him? Well, the opposite of a circle, basically, which is these sharp... glass-like rectangles, trapezoids, whatever you want to call them, which also define the shape of his antlers. Like, he's all sharp edges, whereas the person he killed was all round, you know? Like, that's, again, just a visual juxtaposition where we see these square shapes being replaced with the circle symbol of the victim, the person that these people have come to avenge. And again, light as power, as the symbols on these characters sputter to life like neon lights. And just, all of this lightning animation is so sexy. Look at that. That's just so cool. I'm such a sucker for it. I'm such a sucker for like characters like we're showing off the power and they've just got lightning flashing out of their thing. It's like, oh yes, shit is about to go down when the lightning comes out. And I don't have that much extra to say, I think, about these bits, because we've seen these transitions before, like where we use the flash of light to transition from one person's weapon to another person's weapon to a third person's weapon, because this is the epic suiting up, powering up, getting ready to slam and jam, basically, scene, and everything about it is just cool as hell. Like, all of this, like, if I'd seen this in a cartoon when I was a kid back in the mid-90s, like, I'd be like, fuck yes, now the cool shit is about to happen, that's so badass. Love the smoke animation here, too. And see how, again, they're taking care to have the character move on different frames than the smoke around them to give, again, that sense of separation from the environment, that he's not just a part of a moving scenery, but he's an actual... And again, the lip curl over the teeth, showing the... what's it called? The fleshy bits between the teeth. The gums. That's what they're called. Gums. And he steps, literally steps, on the triangles and sharp shapes that represent the power of our villain. And again, with the circles in the background, because this is what they've come to avenge, again. And that is juxtaposed instantly against the sharp, jutting points of light identifying our villain. And between the two of them, the briefcase, the thing that started all this, the thing that their friend or lover or whatever the heck was killed over. Ooh. Oh, that's brutal. Oh, that's good. And I love the little detail that as this guy narrows his eyes, raises a gun, you can see how it's kind of like he's squeezing this eye shut as he's trying to aim down the sights with this one eye, which is such a little tiny detail. They didn't need to put that in there, but I love that they put some thought into how would this guy's cybernetic eyes work when he's like hired muzzle for the bad guy. And then, boom, another impact frame. Sticks around for 2 frames, poof, and then this guy's whole head is blown off. Or half of his head is blown off, rather. And again, every time I see frames like this, like with all the sparks and the lightning and the stuff flying out and it's so cool. And again, notice the different timings on our 2 other secondary heroes. She moves, he moves, she moves, she moves, he moves. Ooh, lovely animation smears, love those. As they charge into the scene. And the smoke animation is just so cool. And look how the smoke is animated. Look how the smoke is constructed, because there's really almost nothing there. Once you look at it, it's just this big blue uniform shape with some squiggles across of it. But then the thing that really gives the smoke volume and shape and really makes it feel like it's billowing into the space is these dark shapes that really, again, much like the same way that they did with the character here in the start, like we can see how the light really defines the shape of the character. Let's get back to the smoke. You can see how the dark shadows on the smoke really help define the shape of the smoke, especially when she cuts through it. Poof, and you can see those dark shadows as the smoke gets disturbed and billows around her. Poof, and that's just, that's hard to animate too, by the way. Like, you have to keep so much information in mind about, like, what's the shape of this big, amorphous, billowing thing that's moving around. What exactly is it doing? We have to keep it consistent from frame to frame as much as possible. And then we just get some kick-ass action animation. Again, limited animation, but the smearing on the sword is the cool bit of this. Like, look at the way that, like, here we get the sense he's about to swing it because the sword becomes a wedge, and then it becomes a striking line, and then very quickly Look at the smearing, too. A second striking line. So that even though they don't really animate much of the sword doing anything, because we have those streaking poof, poof, we know exactly what the sword has done. Like, the acting of the character is 100% clear to us because of just the efficient use of the smearing in motion. And, that's a good pose. And again, oh, so cool. It's just so cool. Boom, streak of light across the screen so that we know. Oh, I love that. I love that little... Look at that circular, like, almost whip-like motion as she spins around, comes across, takes the dude's arm off, deflects a bullet, and then we move into our secondary character who is gonna just punch this guy and his afro. And I love the animation smears. You know this about me if you ever watched my animation breakdowns. I love animation smears, and I love this stuff. One of the most impressive things on the Netflix Castlevania series was the animation that was put into some of the fight scenes when Trevor is fighting with his whip. Because that's hard as balls, because you kind of have to have an understanding of, like, the physics of how this big, long object, like, how is gravity acting on it? How is momentum acting on it? When we tighten the thing, how do we do that? Well, we start by unkinking this kink, and then slowly unkinking the rest of it, and then we pull into this. You can see how the bends start as a lot of bending, and the bending becomes less and less and less, and then whoosh, the bending is completely removed as we get the snap as the character is being pulled back to get their ass kicked. Nice. And again, very efficient use of the furry anatomy to, like, really play with this big open, like, front-facing mouth, like... Lovely. And I love the sense of weight as this character falls. Like, it's like... And you can see how the body bounces up, but the head just kind of collides with the floor and stays there. And then the body rests down and settles. So you really get the sense that this guy hit the ground hard. As well he should. More cool-ass cyber furry aesthetics. I don't know what the animal this guy's supposed to be. Is some kind of lizard, I guess? You should be more familiar with animals. Look at this smearing. Like, oh, look at that. I guess the character drops their weight, right, into what they're about to do, and they're swinging this thing back. The smearing sells so much of the power of that movement. Like, you can see how the, like, again, the light smearing really doing the work of really making this movement feel powerful. Like, watch that in motion. And then, as it transitions from an actual physical object into just a smear of light. And I love the detail that she deflects it, and then it just kicks the ass of someone who was about to stab her in the back. And again, with the whipping and the kinking of the wire, there's such... It's just well done. Such nice shapes. And this is something like... This is why the dark... again, where we're playing with light as power, this is why it's important that the scene is dark. Because you can do shots like this, where you just use this streak of colored light to show exactly what's happening with the characters at all times. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. I don't have so much. I don't have a ton of insight. It's just cool. Like, look at that. Look at how the animators are managing the kinks and the shapes of one whip, as another one streaks into the shot and it develops its own kinks, and the other one streaks back. And again, I'm reasonably sure... Yeah, I think the environment here is 3D animated. You can kind of see that if you look at the way the squares on the floor is moving. Animating that so perfectly is a ton of work. So they're using a bit of highly pixelated 3D animation here to kind of take the work away. And I think you can see a little bit of an accidental animation mistake here, where they left in whatever the hell this is. I don't know what that's... but that doesn't matter, because, like, when this scene is in motion, you don't see it at all. You just see the cool-ass action. And I love the flip there. Like, because we get the character's running, and then we get this leap into the hands, and then some really cool foreshortening as the character bursts through into the right side of the screen. And again, the light is being used so efficiently to shape the character. And that's important with a shot like this, because we can't see their head, and it like, absent all of the information about this particular shape of the body, this shot might, like, this particular pose might not look very good, except we get this three-dimensional, like, real feeling of like, shape and weight on her as she moves out of frame, which I think helps a lot in selling it. And another clever little thing being done here. Look at the outlines of the character. They're being outlined, rather than being outlined with dark or with black, they're outlining the character with light instead, which helps sell the cyberpunky neo-noir feeling, of course, but also kind of helps make it a little bit easier to see the outlines on the character in this particular light configuration. Again, look at the acting on this character. Like, you can really see that he's like, like, I love the acting. Like, again, they're using the furry anatomy, like, especially the mouth, to really kind of communicate this guy's in trouble. Oh, no! And then, this is a lovely transition, I think, too, because we start the shot with this character, like, doing a cool-ass flip into the air, and then she exits that shot from the right side, and then she enters this shot from the left. So there's this continuity of motion as she jumps off the dude's cyber arm to do more cool badass shit with her samurai sword. Oh, I love that flip. Like, flips are tough. Flipping a character over believably is a really tough thing to do, especially when the character has no goddamn knees. Like, you have to manage, like, the floating position of the kneecaps correctly, so there's a continuum of motion there. And you can see how the coat especially is being used here to emphasize the speed as they're moving up, and then as they flip around, the coat really sells the arc of that motion down. And you can see how the sword starts to smear as they get ready for the yeesh. And then the strike itself becomes a transition as the fight is very much over. And by the way, cinematic parallel. This scene here is very analogous to that scene there. Like, revenge has been inflicted. He has done to the bad guy what the bad guy did to him. Almost. And again, this is a 3D animated shot. Like, this is a 3D object with the texture on it. And the camera is moving freely through a 3D space. And then the animators are very carefully animating the characters so that they fit. But you can kind of see, like, what you might call a floaty foot effect. Let's see if I can find a good spot. Yeah, you can kind of see it here, for example. How the camera is moving a little bit more quickly than the character is actually rotating around. Because the camera moves on every single frame. But the character only moves every third frame or so? Yeah, something like that. And you can kind of see here, like, for example, how they kind of just glide across the environment a little bit. And that's something that kind of, unless you're animating literally at like 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, however fast the 3D camera is moving, that's always going to happen when 2D animation and 3D animation interact. Because 2D animation just can't move as fast as 3D animation. So it's a difficult discipline of really being careful about how many frames and what frames you use to rotate the character so that their presence in the shot looks believable without too much unnatural gliding through the environment. And here's a clever shot, because, like, the character isn't walking on the briefcase, but this little shot is used to imply that they're standing on the briefcase, as our villain's hand makes sure to secure his investment. And we enter now a space that is much more metaphorical than literal, where you get this golden transition into this cracking, which cracks into the visual symbology of the villain. Like these are the visual symbols of the villain as we understand them, as we see our characters finishing up their fights. And then this lovely transition, like she's finished stabbing that guy to death. We get another lens flare, transitioning us into the blade dripping with purple blood. As our villain is finally being cornered. Like, look at the purple blood. Just, oh boy, that's a lot of it. Interestingly, it's flowing down the stairs, which is weird, because you'd think it would be flowing from the dead people on the ground, but no, the blood is flowing down the stairs from his place of power. Which indicates that this blood is kind of more on his hands than theirs. Because he very much started it. Look at the lovely use of smearing. Or, well, not smearing. Well, yes, it is smearing, but this, like, the speed lines that are used to really sell the power of the movement as the characters move around. I also love the scan lines you can see on the villain's hollow projection face thing. And you can see here a chromatic aberration, where you can see this streak of cyan on the side of his projection, which again helps sell this digital aesthetic thing. And look at the timings again. Like, you can see how the animators are being really careful about what gets to move at the same time and what things have to wait. And again, the code is being used on the female character, on the feminine character rather, to like really sell the motion and the movement that they've got going on. And then we got this, which is some of the cooler animation in this thing. Just from an animation technical perspective, is the dance moves that this guy is doing as he's moving towards his target. Like, that's just a really cool. And again, you can see how the light is used really, really aggressively to shape the outline of the boots and shape the outline of the body, because especially when we're doing a dance move like that, we really need that three-dimensional feeling of exactly what the character's body is doing to sell like the physicality of a dance move like that. And again, animation timing. As we see our two secondary protagonists having trouble dealing with our main villain. Because, of course, they kind of have to, so that our hero can have his triumphant moment of vengeance. Nice face animation there. Like, as you can see, how he looks at the blade, and then grabs it, and then transition into her face. As her power, her light, you can see how the light kind of goes out, and then it breaks. And you can see the face still reflected in the shards as it falls apart. So it's like, okay, they're out of the fight now because their light has been broken, their light has been taken away. And I think that's a shard of the blade that's falling down, which is then reflecting our next contestant stepping up to the plate to have his ass kind of handed to him by the villain, because that's how these final fight scenes have to go. But still with the shards floating in the air, which I think is just such a cool shot. Boom. And I like that, like, he's raising the shard of the blade to give them a stab, at the same time as our protagonist is raising the gun. So you get this race against time, like who's gonna get there first. And again, look at the light, the way it's used to really, really shape the outline of the character. And here, just the composition, all of these lines, like pointing to the villain, this wedge shape, which is also the shape on the head of the character, really framing the villain right there. And then we have these lines, like drawing our eyes to the villain, but also to the juxtaposition between the villain and the hero. This is just a really nicely composed shot. And here we get one of the coolest, but also the most metaphorical shot of the whole thing, because this is the climax. This is the end. That bullet is going to kill our villain. Spoiler alert. But there's a little guy dancing on the bullet. What the hell is he doing there? Well, he's obviously not actually physically there. And by the way, look at this smearing. Like, look at those gorgeous, like the purples and the reds, and the smoke streaking off the bullet as well. But this is where we get some of the best character animation in the whole thing. That stuff. Like, you can tell that this is something that they kind of, like, when you're dealing with limited animation, when you're dealing with these relatively low budget productions, this wasn't cheap. let me just make that clear. Even from a small studio, animation like this isn't cheap. But when you're dealing with, like, planning out a production of an animated short, would you have to go, okay, we have this much budget, we have this much time to get the thing finished, and we have this, and this we want to have in the thing. Like, we have the storyboard, we know which shots we need, we know what character animation we need, and then you do a budgeting, not of the money, not of, as such, but a budgeting of, okay, in the time frame that we have to produce this thing, we can reasonably produce X number of frames of animation, or thousands of frames of animation. Where do we want to put those frames? Like, where do we want to spend our frame budget on characters? When do we want characters to really be expressive, to really have a lot of movement, a lot of character animation going on? And when do we want to maybe have most of the scene be really kind of static? Which is what you get here. Where, like, the characters walk in on the death scene, but it's like, it's also, they're not moving. They're just static, flat images sort of being zoomed away from. And the same thing here. Most of what's happening in this scene is pretty much nothing. Which is also, like, that also works with the emotionally resonant... Oh, shit. What did I do? Pressed the wrong hotkey there. Fuck. Okay, hang on. There. I pressed the wrong hotkey and I accidentally messed up the timeline. It also works with, like, the emotionality of the scene, but also notice, like this guy isn't breathing. He doesn't have a breathe cycle. He's not, like, cradling the other person's head and, like, moving him around, doing it. They're just static images sitting there, because in this shot, it's not that important that we have a whole bunch of motion happening. We just need this, like, to sell the pain and the misery, but everything else can be static. It's fine. But for this shot right here, as we get to shooty bullet time, this is the climax. This is the moment when the final blow is delivered. The bullet that's going to end the boss's life, that's going to exact the revenge, that's going to complete the emotional arc. Here, we need character animation, and we need a lot of it. And we need that character animation to be maximum expressive. So here, everything is in motion. The whole body is moving. The character is emoting all over the place. No expense is spared, because this is where those frames matter. This is where they make the most amount of impact. So that's where the budget of frames goes. Like, to be clear, it's not the production sit down and say, okay, we only have 1,400 animation frames. We need to put the specific number of them in each shot. But, like, that's the principle. Is like trying to allocate your resources where your resources will do the most good for the whole of the thing. And this is the most sort of metaphorical, expressionist rather, shot of the whole thing, because we have the guy firing the bullet at the villain, and on that bullet, like literally riding on that bullet, is this. All of that. And what that is, like, it's interpretive dance, basically, but it's also that. It's that emotion, that it's all his fear, it's all his suffering, it's all his anger, it's all of his loss and his pain. All of that is riding on the bullet. That's what he's doing when he fires, is he's transferring all of that pain and suffering and misery to our bad guy and taking revenge. And I love this dance animation. Like, it's so cool. I really wish it was... part of me kind of wish we got to see it closer up, because we really only get to see it from pretty far away, but... Look at that. Like, he leads with this arm, starts a curve, like a swinging motion around. Then he follows that with the other arm to raise themselves up. And then you can see how that curve is then followed by the curve of the other arm into the spin. And then into this, like, this raising, this grabbing motion almost. And then this lean back. And then this Michael Jackson style almost shuffle thing. And like just look at the expressiveness of the body movement. Like this, you get so much feeling there. And still, they're also animating the light on the bullet. They're also animating like the streaks in the background. And then like that, look at that line of action. Look how the line of action goes from you have this, like this kind of curve shape there, and then stretching out into that curve shape there. And that's when the scream of anguish comes as they sink down on their knees. And so we transition again, like we go from this curve here, right? Into that curve there. And then back into this curve here. So we get this transition between curves that like gives lovely motion. And then we get the scream. The anguish and the pain, and just like look how much stuff is in motion on this character here. Like the fur tuft and coat and the head and the arms, like again the arms describing this long arc of like from the top of the scream into clutching at the chest because that's where the pain is. And then you can see how they sink into themselves. And the lip curl on the face is being used so efficiently here to really, like, to sell the thing. Again, look how they're using the mouth and the teeth to really have this open, screaming, all of the emotion right out there. And then we get this Dr. Strangelove style shot. As we pass through, by the way, the square, which is one of his compatriots, has the square in their face, and the star, which is the lady with the sword. And then the circle, at last, the circle, the vengeance. Which also, by the way, he also makes a big circle in the boss. Like, literally big circle hole. And the lovely effect here, by the way, with the glitching of the boss's cyber face or whatever as it sputters out of existence. And you can see the gold dropping out of the case, but more importantly, as we get to the next shot, let's move a little faster. Look look what his blood is. Golden. And again, Knights of the Light Table just deciding, yeah, we can animate a gun, fuck you. Still so damn hard. And this guy dies, holding the case in his hands. Hey, where have we seen that before? So there's this, like, this circle is completed kind of thing going on. As their face sputters out of existence. And our heroes leave with, as it were, the prize. And then this final shot as our hero transitions into the poor victim at the start, ending on the circle once again. So we get all these things like coming full circle, literally. All these things like going from one position to another. And just absolute credit to the animation team at Knights of the Light Table, because as you can see, like, Patrick Stannard is the director, and he does the storyboards, and he helps on the animation, and India Swift does storyboards and helps on the animation, and like it's a small animation studio. So like you can see how many of the names recur across multiple roles. These people have really put in a ton of work to make these things go together. And here we see, by the way, backstory to the main narrative. Like, this is how the gold was acquired. Our circle-headed friend apparently manages to win it by gambling, buys the leather coat for our triangle-headed friend as a gift, because I suppose they're friends or lovers or siblings or something along those lines. And then we see, some people have found out that our circle-headed friend has a bunch of gold, and while our circle-headed friend has a bunch of other shape-headed people to help protect them, well, this guy also has the minions that we just saw, the fight scene. So we get to see the backstory of how all this stuff came to be, how it happened. And there's also this little thing. Suspect wanted in connection with the casino fire. Right, and that's our circle-headed friend again, who's wanted for connection with the casino fire. But as we saw, they didn't do a fire or anything. They won that money. But our hyper-capitalist bad guy, using their influence over the media, no doubt, manages to paint them as a fugitive and kills them. Anyway, bloody cool music video. Really enjoyed that. That was excellent bit of animation from Knights of the Light Table, and good on Night Runner. The song is pretty good too. I'll be listening to that a lot more. And yeah, link to the whole thing down in the description, obviously, as I said at the top of the video. And oh god, this video's over an hour long. I haven't been keeping track of it at all. Oh, my brand. My brand is talking about animation too much. If you've enjoyed this long-ass ramble about this Cyberpunk Furry animation music video, then you can hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons down below. I would greatly appreciate it, because YouTube tracks how many people hit those buttons, and it decides, based on how many people hit the buttons, on whether my videos get shown, like, to anyone ever. Not just to you, but to anyone ever. So, for YouTubers, the reason why we constantly, hey, like, comment, subscribe, guys, is because it genuinely does kind of matter to our work and to being able to do this stuff. So if you want to help me out, click those buttons. That's very helpful. If you want to help me out more directly, I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, and I have a tip jar. All of that you can find down in the description. And if you want to sign up for like a Patreon donation or a one-time tip, or buy some merchandise, you can also do that. That also would be very helpful. Now, if you don't want to support me directly, believe me, I completely understand that. That's completely okay. But at the end of my videos, I try to encourage people to, even if you don't want to support me, at least try to support the content creators whose work you do enjoy directly with anything that you can. Like, especially smaller content creators, like people who do niche content. Like, those $1 donations, those tiny little pledges that kind of don't feel like they're doing very much, they actually mean the same as, like, literally thousands of views on a video. They have an outsized amount of impact, like, for relatively small donations. So if you have content creators whose work you enjoy, please consider supporting them directly with whatever you can, whenever you can, because it makes much more of a difference than you think. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, well, then you can hit the dislike button down below, and a hit squad from my evil cyber corporation will be along to your location shortly to murder you and take from you whatever briefcases of gold you may happen to have lying around. Thank you very much for watching.